Okay, we've had some fun putting a lot of background images on. We've learned about margin and padding for moving text around. So usually we'll use padding in order to move text around relative to a background image. And then margin you could also use depending. In this top one I used margin because I was moving the H1 down. Let's explore some more details of this box model right now in terms of the margin and the padding and how they interact with the border around an element and the width and the height of an element. So I'm going to work up here in the H1 and the H2 for a minute. The first thing I'm going to do is talk a little bit about block level elements and inline elements. So here is an H1. I'm just going to put I'm going to bring it up in the inspector and then I'll put a border around it just to show us what that looks like. So here it is in the inspector. I put a huge margin on the top, so I see a lot of orange on the top, and I see a little bit of orange on the bottom, and then I see that the element itself is this blue area. So if I put a border around this thing, we can kind of have it stuck on and see it, it would look like this. Let's say 1 pixel solid red. While we're here, I will put a background color on it too. And I'm going to choose yellow. Whoops. Okay, so I put a red border on it and a background color of yellow. Now I chose these two because we haven't talked about them yet, so I wanted to make sure to talk about them. So background color is light, it goes with background image and the repeat and so forth. You'll see it show up on the whole background of the element. The background color will, if you have an image with a transparent background as a background image, you'll see the background color showing through it. Or if your background image doesn't fully fill up your element, you'll see the background color in the places where the background image is not. The border always has to have 3 things specified. The size of the border, so how wide it is, what the style is, so solid is a very common one, dotted, dashed. There are some inset and outset borders that look different depending on the browser. So there are some different options, but you have to specify something. And then you have to specify a color. So this could be red. If I wanted this same red in hex, I could say F00. So it could be in hexadecimal numbers with the pound sign. Or I know that you've been using some RGB colors with the Khan Academy as well. So you could also put an RGB color here too. So those all work. So if I have a border and a background color applied to the H1, this is what it shows up as in the browser. And thus underscoring to us what is going on with the H1. So even though the H1 text is only this wide, the actual H1 itself takes up the whole width of the screen. So any element that does this is called a block level element. So if you want to understand for yourself what is a block level element, what is an inline element, the easiest thing is, does it take up the full width of the page by default? If yes, you're looking at a block level element. So lots of things in this page are block level elements. Here's H1, here's H2, here's H3, here's P, another block level element. So yes, P can have multiple, like a whole stream of text that's wrapping, but the actual P takes up the entire width of the page. Moving down, other block level elements in this page. A list item. The list item itself, let's see it in the inspector, so I don't have to go back to the HTML for a second. But if I highlight the LI, look, that text is way shorter than the width of the page, but the actual LI and actually each one takes up the entire width of the page. This is the behavior of a block level element. In contrast, an inline element only takes up the amount of space that is taken up by its text. So an example of that would be an A tag. So if I inspect this A tag here, and I hover over the A. So you can see that what's selected as part of the A is that blue item is the blue part in the top pane there with the text sample number 1. That is the A. The green thing on the left is the padding that I put on the left to move it off of its background image. So the entire A only takes up that little piece, not the whole line. Other examples would be bold, italicizing, so EM and strong tags. An IMG or image tag is also an inline element. So, but most of the elements on your web pages will be block. There's just a handful of inline elements that exist. When you get a little more advanced with CSS, you'll discover that you can change something to behave like an inline element or a block level element using the display property. We're not going to learn it today, but we'll get there eventually. So there's a quiz this week about block versus inline, just to get you thinking about the various tags that you know about and what their behavior is. And most of them are going to be block. A few of them will be inline. And again, the way you can tell is, does it go all the way across the whole page? So here's what a border looks like. Trying not to abuse the borders. Often borders are used to put a line above something or below something, or as a separator between items if you're talking vertically. Background color is used quite a bit in today's styling. And you can also put gradients, as you saw when the brackets hints were showing up. Here, since we have this one highlighted, I'm going to illustrate the padding again over here in the browser to just say, if I added some padding, remember you can say padding bottom, padding top, for example, to EM. So you can add padding to the top, and because it's inside, so padding is always inside the border. And margin, as we saw, this thing has a huge margin on the top of it, that orange part, that's outside the border. So margin is always outside and padding is inside. Over here on the right, I specified the margin top and the padding top. So that's why I'm seeing them only on the top. If I were to specify all of the paddings at once, let me turn that off for a minute and write a new rule. I can also say padding like 2EM, for example, or 1EM, and that will modify all the paddings at once. So everything gets a padding of 1EM. Or I can list out some different numbers. So say 10px, 20px. If I do this with just two numbers, this first number is the top to bottom number, and the second number is the left to right number. This is confusing because it's opposite of the background position, which does the, in terms of which, so the vertical number goes first in the padding and the margin shortcuts. If I continue to list things like 10 pixels, 20 pixels, 30 pixels, 40 pixels, then you start at the top. So this is top, right, and you go clockwise, right. So the right-hand side has an extra 20 pixels of padding. The bottom has a 30 pixels of padding, and the left-hand side has the most padding with 40 pixels of padding on the left. So these are the abbreviations for padding. These are the same direction, same kind of thing for margin. So for example, if I wanted to override my margin top setting, I could say margin, and then I could leave that 500 pixels of margin on the top. Whoa. Now it's giving me 500 pixels of margin everywhere, and then just say 0, 0, 0, which is the equivalent of what I have up top. So this sets just the top margin to 500 pixels and the rest of them to 0. This actually will have some effect because just setting margin top didn't unset the other margins, whereas this margin, so let me take this one off, does have a tiny bit of effect. You can see the beauty of CSS design. Text moves slightly when I check and uncheck this because the default margin here is not 0. It looks like it's just a couple pixels. And the browser is also combining the bottom margin of the H1 and the top margin of the H2, but that's a subject for another day. Okay, so that was block versus inline. This is a red border, a background color, and can give you some idea about margin and padding. We have a practice exercise for you to do this week, the medieval practice, which will also help you practice margin versus padding, and also some borders and lots of background images. In the final, I think I'll do one more video after this because we're gonna do width and height. I can't really think of a place where height would be appropriate to set here. It's not usually appropriate to set height in a web page, very occasionally, and really only when you're dealing with imagery. But I think I'll do one to set the width to get this width, the text to fit on the page. So coming up next, width.